Welcome, Irish fans, to the post Clemson Notre Dame podcast. And whew, man, I hope you were
That's a great response to the game.
man, I hope you were all locked in to irishbreakdown.com because we were going nuts on there. My emotions were going nuts in my living room. And again, I texted you this during the game. It's a good thing that I was not in the press box. I've been in the press box almost every game since 2004 up until this year with all the craziness. And I've learned to, your fandom, you leave your fandom at the door. There's no cheering in the press box. I would have gotten kicked out of the
You
press
leave your
box.
outward fandom at the door.
That
You
is
and I have
correct.
sat by each other at games before, and I've walked out with bruised legs because you
Yes.
keep punching me every time something happens. Like, did you see that? And Vince, last night was exactly what you'd expect from number 1 versus number 4.
Yeah,
It was
did
a
not let down
great
at
game
all.
between two great teams. And, of course, for the first time in a long time, we could say that and it be after a Notre Dame win. And that was obviously the big part. That was a fun – I mean, if you're a college football fan, forget a Notre Dame or Clemson fan. If you're just a college football fan, that was an awesome game.
No
just
doubt.
a really awesome game and everything you'd hope you'd see from number 1 versus number 4.
Well, and the last time I had that feeling walking out of Notre Dame Stadium was in 2005 with the Bush push and USC and Notre Dame. And that was also – I was on the field for that one, rushing, excited, back, not excited anymore. And that – it was very similar because the first half was unbelievable. I mean, outside of the fact that it was field goals instead of touchdowns, everything was falling Notre Dame's way. I mean, it was a great half of football. And then the second half showed up, and my emotion level was, I mean, they just couldn't put it together. And then, every time they would get close, and then Clemson would score, and then Clemson would score.
You mean Clemson played like champions?
Yeah, they kind of have that thing going on where they won 2 national titles in the past few years. So, you knew they weren't going to quit, and I knew going into halftime 10 points wasn't enough. Because you know that Notre Dame could have been about 15 points more than that, right? I mean, no doubt about it. So. It was I was on pins and needles the whole second half. After Ian Book fumbled it into the end zone, it was pretty much, this game's over. Yeah, that's how I felt. And then to go into overtime, my 13-year-old and I were just going bonkers. I think he was laughing more at me than with me because I was all over the place. At one point, I had to put my social media away because I was watching it on the app, and I was 2 plays behind.
Yeah.
And so people are texting me like, oh, man, and that was a great play. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. No, that was very frustrating. But what a game, man. I mean, what a game. Big picture, obviously it has implications that are great for Notre Dame. Give me some of your thoughts as you were walking out of the stadium, walking to your car. What were you thinking after this game?
I think for me, Vince, it was a situation where you wanted Notre Dame to win it the right way. And what I mean by that is you didn't want it to be a game where the freshman quarterback went out there, played poorly, turned it over 5 times, and Notre Dame wins because Clemson was shorthanded. You want it to be a great game, and I expected it to be that way. I did not expect Clemson to tank. And as I said to you, as we talked about in last week's podcast, these are the games Clemson's up for. When Clemson loses, it's like the Pitt, Syracuse, like a game that they're not really locked in for. Clemson doesn't lose these kind of games. And if you go back to the start of the 2018 season, coming into this game, Clemson was 36-1. Their only loss was to LSU in a title game, which was one of the greatest college football single season college football teams ever. And Clemson led double digits early in that game. This is a team that just doesn't lose. And if you're going to win, you're going to have to beat Clemson. Clemson's not going to beat themselves.
Right.
And if you look at it last night, that's really what happened. And one of the themes, and I knew this is going to happen, no matter how it went, unless Notre Dame won like 42-14, which
nobody in their right mind would have thought that was going to take place.
It was going to be, with Trevor Lawrence. And then when the freshman quarterback played well, it was, Clemson didn't miss a beat because that kid played well. Neither's true, in my opinion. And we're not going to dive into that because we could do a whole show on what would have happened if Trevor Lawrence played.
Sure. Well, the what-if game is –
right. And I did a video tonight. I kind of gave my thoughts on that on a YouTube channel, the Irish Breakdown YouTube channel. So check that out. But, for me, Vince, it was what we do know is how these two teams played. and who these two teams had. Clemson would have loved to have Trevor Lawrence and Tyler Davis, just like Notre Dame would have loved to have had Braden Lindsey and a healthy Kevin Austin.
Absolutely.
You play with what you play with. And what I was impressed with last night was Notre Dame won it. It wasn't a situation where Clemson made a mistake that gave Notre Dame a last-minute chance. Notre Dame's defense made the stop they needed to make to get Notre Dame the ball back. Then the offense made the plays. They scored 2 touchdowns on Clemson in overtime, and then the defense puts it away. This is a game where Notre Dame earned this win, and that's how you want it to be. Like, you don't want it to be like, well, that team played really poorly, and they made uncharacteristic mistakes that Notre Dame took advantage of, and Notre Dame caught some breaks. No, Notre Dame earned the win. They battled, they fought. And I'll be honest with you, Vince, and this is probably something that not everyone's going to agree with me on, but this is how I felt leaving the stadium. I don't know if Clemson could have played much better than it played last night with its current situation. I mean, I felt Clemson got everything it could have got out of that game, because the areas where Notre Dame dominated are areas I expected Notre Dame to dominate. And then the areas where I thought Notre Dame won matchup advantages are areas where we talked about offensive line versus the Clemson defensive line. Notre Dame got the win. Was it a great battle between the two? Yes. Notre Dame was better. Notre Dame's defensive line dominated the Clemson offensive line. We thought that could happen coming in. Notre Dame's receivers, and especially the matchups against the safeties, we thought that could favor Notre Dame, and it did. So I thought Clemson played about as well as it could have played last night. I don't think the same thing about Notre Dame. And that's kind of the whole thing about, well, when Clemson gets Trevor Lawrence back, they're going to smash Notre Dame. Maybe. But
yeah, maybe.
When I watch if I'm Brian Kelly and if I'm Tommy Rees, if I'm Clark Lee, if I'm Mike Elston, if I'm Jeff Quinn, if I'm all the Notre Dame coaches, I'm sitting in the room tonight saying, man, we should have played better. We could have played better.
Left points out there, man.
A lot. And so when I look at this Notre Dame team, you just beat the number 1 team in the country, a team that had gone 36-1 in its last 37 games. And if you look, and their record since 2015 is just incredible. 2 national titles. You beat that team and you look at it and you say, we can still play better. Right. We can definitely still play better. And so, and the difference in this game was when Notre Dame got stops, they were earned stops. They were sacks, pass breakups, run stops. It was making a big play to put Clemson in a bad spot. When Notre Dame got stopped, it was Notre Dame making mistakes. It was, you're up 7-0, and you go down the field and you go on you're a 4th and 1 at the 2.
You're about to punch it in.
And anyone that watched the first quarter of that game had to know that there's no way Clemson is stop. Notre Dame's offensive line pushed Clemson around for the entire game, especially early. We'll never know, but I feel the odds were quite good Notre Dame was going to at least pick up the first down, if not score on that next play. And instead you get a false start, which is not a Clemson play. It's you making a mental mistake.
It's
freshman making a
self-inflicted wound. Yeah,
so instead of 14-0, it's 10-0, right?
Right.
And then the next time Notre Dame's on the field, it's what, I think 10-7, right? Notre Dame goes down the field again. Ian Book scrambles. He hits Michael Mayer at like the 2. If he catches that ball, he walks into the end zone.
Yep.
And instead, he drops it. Notre Dame has to settle for a field goal. And then, of course, Ian Book's fumble. I'd say that's the only one that you could maybe say was Clemson making a play, because the guy didn't strip it. But Ian Book's got to do a better job of protecting that ball. It wasn't as good of a play as right. It wasn't as good of a play as, like, let's say the Jeremiah Wusu plays. So you look at it and you say, well, there's a lot of missed opportunities out there. And when you can beat the number 1 team in the country, a team that's been in the national championship game for the last 5 years, and the one year they weren't in the title game, they got beat in the semifinals by the team that won the title, right? That's big-time football.
Yeah.
And you outplayed them the entire game. Now, like you expect a champion to do, Clemson battled back, actually took the lead. There were some mistakes that I think Notre Dame made from a coaching standpoint that we'll get into. But I felt like this was a big-time game. And the big thing for me, Vince, was what something you and I have been talking about for a long time, which is for Notre Dame to be a championship contending team, they have to get back to playing big boy football. And big boy football at Notre Dame is you win in the trenches. Why did Notre Dame beat Florida State in 1993? Why did Notre Dame beat Florida State or Miami in 1988? Because those teams dominated in the trenches. And those teams could somewhat neutralize any athleticism advantages that an opponent might have by dominating in the trenches.
Yeah.
And last night, Notre Dame had the better line play on both sides of the ball. And it was a situation where when you can do that, where you can physically be better than your opponent, that's where a team like Notre Dame can say, hey, we're really good. We didn't need onside kicks and trick plays, and we didn't need
right.
You know, we'll make our own plays. You know, and that was a really the really impressive part. It doesn't mean Clemson played perfect. I mean, you know, Travis Etienne bobbles that ball, but there aren't name me another linebacker in the country that could have got to him that fast where he would have been able to pick it up and run it back.
Well, and look,
that's my point.
The reason he bobbled it is because he took his eyes off the ball because the number 6 was in his face.
Nobody else has a guy like that, in my opinion. I'm sorry, they just don't.
And in the post game, he said, "Look, we knew that play," and he said, "Sean Crawford told me that because we saw it coming, we saw it on film. He told me, hey, this is what's coming." So he goes, "As soon as the ball was snapped, I'm in there."
Right.
And that's why he fumbled. It wasn't a mistake by Etienne that it just so happened that Jeremiah Wishaw-Cornwell was there and he's just lucky.
That's making a play.
Absolutely.
That's making a play.
Yes, no question.
Yeah, and so that's the fun part about it, Vince, is it was a great game and Notre Dame had to earn it.
Yes.
And they had to fight to earn it. And they had to overcome adversity. and they did it. And you know, it was a great you know, it's kind of like we've seen this story play out before with Notre Dame and Clemson, and then Notre Dame and Georgia, and then, you know, Notre Dame, Florida State, you know, and it was like, I'll be honest with you, Vince, when Notre Dame missed that 4th and 7 with Ben Skoranek, I started writing my post-game story.
Yeah, I thought it was over. I didn't think Notre Dame was
good. I did. I'm not gonna lie, I did. Yeah, and when they got the ball back with was it like minute 48?
Something, yeah.
At their own 9. I said, well, let's see what they do. But I still kind of was writing in between that series.
Yeah.
But as soon as that series started, I stopped writing because, okay, so I was in Athens last year for the Notre Dame Georgia game. And I remember when Notre Dame got the ball at the end at midfield with 2 minutes left.
Yeah, it was just a little bit over.
And I just felt, nope. I had no confidence that team when they just, you could just see it. I mean, look, I'm a coach. I've been around football a long time. You can see it.
Body language.
I remember, I've used this example, you know, when I was a young coach, we played Mount Union in the 3rd round of the national playoffs. And our guys stepped on that field and we thought we could win. Mount Union knew they were going to win, and you could tell the difference. And that's an example. When Notre Dame stepped on the field last year against Georgia with that chance to win it at the end, offensively, they hoped that they could do something.
So did I.
They didn't really believe it, and you could just see it.
No.
When they stepped on the field last night, you could just see kind of the way Ian Book ran onto the field, the way the offense ran on the field. There was a sense of purpose. You could see it, Vince. And I said, oh, okay, let me see what they can do. Okay, it's one thing to do it, but now you got to go execute against a really good defense. And they did. They just kept making play after play after play.
We'll get into that drive at the end.
Yeah, and that was the thing for me is like this team has a little something different. And that was the difference between, you know, the closest we've got to that was the 2014 game against Florida State, because I still feel like Notre Dame won that game.
Yes,
they had that game taken away from them, but they had a similar situation last night. It was a really bad officiating call that looked like it was going to cost Notre Dame the game. But if the defense doesn't make a stop and Clemson gets a first down, it's ball game.
Absolutely.
It's just a great team win, Vince.
Yeah, no, I completely. The only place that you can say that something maybe was gifted to them or it was a mistake on Clemson's part was the way they handled the clock there the last time they had the ball.
Yeah,
and again,
that's just who they are. I mean, teams like tempo teams that's just who they are. I mean, yeah, I agree with that.
But to leave that much time on the clock, you know, allow Notre Dame to have 2 timeouts. But they still had to go, I think, 90 yards or whatever
91.
It was. Yeah, so
91 yards.
That's not an easy thing to do. I don't care what defense is on the other side, especially Clemson. So
yeah,
let's start to dissect this thing a little bit. We'll start on the offensive side. overall thoughts on the offense, kind of how, because look, if you're asking me, my thoughts on the offense changed from half to half to the overtime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It went from here to here, back up to here again. Play calling, execution, all of it. So I'll let you kind of lead this thing off, your overall thoughts on the offense.
Well, I know your thoughts because we talked about it. So I'm kind of speaking for the both of us here.
Yeah.
I thought early on, I loved what I saw from Tommy Rees. I saw balance. I saw aggressiveness. I thought, hey, we're going to lean on our big boys and we're going to keep them off balance. Took shots early. Not only just like design shots, but also, just really attacking outside, attacking inside. He really had Clemson on his heels. And then like great coaches do, and we talked about this, Clemson's going to make adjustments at halftime.
Of course they are.
And I felt like my frustration in the second half was Notre Dame did not react to what Clemson did in reaction to Notre Dame starting so well against them. Clemson started loading the box. They started running a lot of really aggressive run stunts, just trying to fill up all the gaps. Safeties were creeping downhill, and they weren't doing things offensively to attack that. We talked about this. We said this was going to happen on Thursday. And what is Tommy Rees going to do when that happens? If you run the ball effectively early, this is what they're going to do. And then Notre Dame didn't have an answer for it.
I agree.
Really until the final drive. So, you're talking about and honestly, even after the first quarter, because Notre Dame's only touchdown in the second quarter was a defensive one. They got a ball on a fumble. They get the ball to 25, and they end up kicking a field goal after losing a bunch of yards.
Yeah.
And I felt like the mistake Coach Rees made in this game was in the second half, he allowed Clemson to dictate what he was going to do, as opposed to kind of the counterpunch of, okay, you want to do this? Then here's what we're going to do to hurt you. We're gonna screen you. We're gonna run a tunnel screen. We're gonna do something to try to take advantage of your hard charging. Something that I'd love to see is put Chris Tyree in the game, and instead of running the reverse, which you showed him on film last week. Maybe you run a tunnel screen where they let them blitz upfield, then let your lineman just hit a little quick screen behind it. Do something like that with Tommy Trumbull. And so I didn't feel like, and then they just kind of abandoned the inside runs for a little while there. I mean, Notre Dame only carried the ball 9 times. They carried the ball over 20 times, so I think 144 yards in the first half.
Yep.
They only had 9 called run plays in the second half.
Right.
And to me, that's not balance. That's you letting the defense dictate to you what you're going to do. And that's a mistake that a lot of young coordinators make. And I think that he made that last night. But I also think they kind of bounce back. And I think that, they got that long touchdown drive. I'm not going to ask for balance when you're down, a touchdown with 1:48 left and you've got to go 91 yards.
Yeah,
right?
No.
I mean, but you got into overtime and, they ran the ball well. They moved the pocket a little bit. But I really thought also the offensive line really stepped up in the overtime period too. But so it's a little bit up and down. But I think that even when he went away from the run, I did think that Tommy Rees stayed aggressive. They kept trying to attack down the field with the pass game. It's just that they weren't really putting themselves in positions to execute as effectively because of what Clemson was doing, and they weren't doing things to hurt Clemson and say, hey, you want to do this? Then we're going to do this to you, and it's going to make you pay for it.
And then you can get back to what you were doing in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But, but again, you have a first-year coordinator, right?
Sure.
This is his first big game moment. Tommy Rees didn't play in a lot of games like this when he was a player either.
No, it's a good point.
So a learning experience. But I thought overall, I thought that they played with a great deal of confidence on offense last night. And part of being a good coaching staff is not just calling good plays. What have I said for years? I don't care if you're a mediocre play caller. What really makes you a great coordinator, what really makes you a great coaching staff is, can you get your guys ready to play Monday to Friday? And so, yes, there's some things. If I was sitting down with Tommy Rees tonight, I would nitpick a lot of things before he had, security escort me off campus for being there trying to tell him what plays to run. But what I would give him a ton of credit for is whatever you guys did during the week, your boys were ready to play.
Yeah.
Your boys played hard. And even when they were making mistakes, it was never a head down, oh no, here we go again mentality. That was never there. You could see it. That was never there. And that's why on that, because when you get to that, there's nothing that can happen that's getting you out of that.
Right.
Once you're there in a game, you're there. So you wouldn't have had the 91-yard drive if they were there. They never got there. It was always we got this.
Mm-hmm.
And, what we said on in the podcast on Thursday, what I said in my game prediction on Friday was, I just feel at the end of the game, this is going to be on Ian Book's shoulders to go down and win the game. And I think he's going to do it. And he did. And it was fun to watch.
It was
fun to watch.
It was great to watch. I felt one of the feelings I had after the game was I felt so good for Ian Book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's taking heat from all kinds of people. He said he
deservedly so.
No doubt about it. Look, we're not going to pick on a kid just to pick on a kid. I mean, that's not – I do that in my classroom. I'm not going to do – no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But no, he has taken it.
Yeah.
And he said, look, guys, I got this. And he was supremely confident. You can tell the way he was playing. He battled. That's one of the words you like to use a lot. He battled that entire game. And even after he fumbled into the end zone and I pretty much wrote the game off, it's like nothing happened. I mean, he played like nothing happened to him. And that's a credit to him. Yeah. And it's a credit to the coaching staff because many of the players, Ian Book included, said, look, the coaches have been telling us all along, we're going to win this game. Right. We had a plan for when the fans were going to rush the field. He told me I'm going to drive us down at the end of the game to win it. It's that once you get told things enough, you start to believe it.
And see, that right there is why I wrote the article 2 weeks ago about Brian Kelly and why I was so ticked at what he was saying publicly last week before the game. Because it's kind of like he was for a minute there, it seemed like he was embracing it. And my concern was, are we going to see what we always see in big games? Look, it was obvious based on what the players were saying after the game, how they played, that Brian Kelly did not treat this like it's just another game. He gave lip service to it. And so that was good to see, because that was my fear. When he 2 weeks ago, before Georgia Tech, he started talking about, like, we know what's coming and we know what the moment is. And I said, okay, he finally is embracing. And then last week he got all defensive and all those kind of things. And it's like, come on, coach, because that's how he would be before other big games. Right. But, whatever he was doing there and whatever he's doing on the practice field, the reality is his players were confident. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. But I also think something that you and I have talked about in the past, Vince, which is you don't overcome this COVID offseason, canceling a game, doing all those things without great leadership on your football team.
Yeah.
And that leadership doesn't just impact your ability to make sure you stay focused during COVID. It also impacts your ability to weather the storm that was going to come. When Notre Dame went up 23-13, I did not say, ball game.
No.
Well, all you've done now is piss Clemson off. You know what I mean? It's like they're going to come out swinging.
Yeah.
And what happened against Boston College the week before is Boston College, when Clemson came back at them, Boston College didn't know what to do. And they folded in the second half. Notre Dame took that punch. Yeah. They got knocked down and they came back up. Yeah, it just kind of like reminded me like a Rocky fight, where Rocky gets knocked down and it's like, uh-oh, you just ticked him off. Well, we knew that about Clemson, but what we didn't know was that Notre Dame would do the same thing back at Clemson.
Right.
You knocked us down, but now all you've done is strengthen our resolve. And I think it was such a great team performance, and I think that the offense played with confidence knowing their defense could make plays. Their defense played with the confidence that they thought their offense would make plays. And, that's what champions do. And when you look at the play of Ian Book, there was a lot of things that he left a lot of plays out there. Sure. I mean, he did. And there were reads he missed. I thought early on there was two plays, especially early, where I thought he should have thrown the ball to Tommy Tremble. And then there was another play where he threw it to Tommy Tremble, but the read probably should have taken him to a crossing route. But the difference is when he wasn't making those reads early, it wasn't I see it, but I'm afraid to throw it.
No, it wasn't that
His
at all.
progressions were not taking him where he needed to go quickly enough. Or it just was it was one of those things where, okay, he just missed that one, which quarterback's going to do. It wasn't an unwillingness to attack.
Right. And that's been our criticism of him all
exactly,
along.
Because the reason I say that is because he did attack in other instances. The Javon McKinley back shoulder. He hit two post routes last night. When was the last time Ian Book hit 2 post routes in a game?
No doubt.
And
the other thing was on the one to Javon McKinley, wasn't great throw. It was underthrown.
And that's my thing. It's like,
just do it.
Right. You had the back shoulder to Javon McKinley. You had the post route to Javon McKinley. You had 2 deep balls to Ben Skowronek. Neither of them were complete.
Right.
But he went after it.
Yes.
He attacked. Sometimes, look, what's the old expression? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Right.
Well, last night, Ian Book missed some shots, whether it was not making the right read or whatever, but he was aggressive. And that led, and like the throw to McKinley was like a 3rd and 8. Or not McKinley, but Tremble. And I don't think he made the right read. If he hits the crossing route, that guy catches and runs.
And it's an easier throw, too.
Exactly. But he threw that drag to Tremble with conviction.
And
it was well covered. He let him. He threw it on time. Because he threw it before the other defender could get there. Right. He threw it on time. He threw it with conviction, and he threw it accurately. And you had texted me about this during the game. When Ian Book's playing confidently, he throws accurately.
Yeah.
And we saw that last night. So even when he was making the wrong read, he was throwing with the conviction needed to make plays. And this is what we've been talking about a long time. So now the question moving forward is, and we won't talk too much about this, is can he now build on this? Is this the game that finally gives him the confidence to play like this all the time?
I hope so.
Or is he going to kind of revert back? We don't know the answer to that.
No, we don't.
Because I thought he played with this kind of moxie 2 weeks ago against Pitt, and then he regressed back against Georgia Tech. So I'm hoping that this is the kind of thing that makes him say, hey, dude, you got the monkey off your back, man. Now just go play ball.
You just beat the number 1 team in the country at your own house, man.
Just go out and play ball. Because how you get upset by Boston College is by being conservative, not taking chances, those kind of things. If you're aggressive against Boston College, you're going to win, and you're going to win convincingly because you have way better players than they do at almost every position.
Correct.
So that was what I like to see from Ian Book last night. And the fumble and how he responded to it, even on plays he wasn't making, the fumble, it reminded me a lot of the LSU game back in 2017. Because everybody remembers Ian Book's 3rd and 19 throw to Miles Boykin, and they remember his touchdown pass to Miles Boykin. But a lot of people forget he had a terrible interception in the 3rd quarter against LSU with Notre Dame driving. And the offense was doing nothing up to that point in time. And that's why that turnover against LSU was so crushing, because you're like, that was your only scoring chance.
That was it, yeah.
Well, what we saw from that Ian Book back then was that turnover kind of pissed him off.
Mm-hmm.
And he went out and played really well the rest of the game. I saw that same kind of mindset from him on Saturday, where in the past when Ian Book would struggle early or he'd make a mistake, it's kind of like he went to the tank. This was in 2019 and early this year. And the reason I've said in the past that if we saw the 2018 version of Ian Book last year or this year, Notre Dame would be really good, because that Ian Book was confident. That was the Ian Book we saw back in 2018 where he fumbles early against Northwestern. And he doesn't rattle him. He goes out and makes big plays. Northwestern blocks a punt to make it 24-21, all the momentum, and Ian Book just leads him right down the field for the game-clinching touchdown, right? Like that Ian Book had a level of confidence we haven't seen really since the last Clemson game.
Right.
He didn't have it in that game, and we haven't seen it since. We saw it last night. And that mindset of, it's almost kind of like you shouldn't have done that, right?
Well,
you
it was
have done that, right?
Like we talked about Trevor Lawrence throwing that pick 6 a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah,
when they were losing, and it's like the worst thing they could have done is picked off Trevor Lawrence and taken it back to
what was it, Georgia Tech, right? They picked him off early in the game or something like that.
Yeah, something
I don't remember
that.
if they scored on it, but I just remember they picked him off early.
Yeah, I think it was a pick 6, but either way, it was like probably shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, that was because I think he threw like 5 touchdowns in the first half. After that, it was just
yeah, it was like,
and we saw that kind of moxie from Ian Book last night, and that's
great.
My thing is when he plays like that, he can be really good.
Yeah,
it's just the frustrating thing is we don't see that consistently enough, and we definitely don't see it in big games. Well, we're not going to be having that conversation now, because
Correct.
He did it. Now he's got to keep doing it.
Sure.
We may have it after a game.
And there's going to be more big games coming.
Correct, because the schedule gets tougher. There's nothing like this, but I think that's something that I think you can build on, and hopefully he does. And this next week's game is going to be part of that. I think the schedule sets up nicely for that, but we'll get into that when we do the BC podcast. But I thought it was good, and I thought it was a great. I thought the offensive line, to me, Vince, though, was the star of the game. I mean, I just thought I just thought their ability to just push. I mean, they pushed Clemson around.
And they were young up front, the Clemson defensive line, but they are good.
Yes.
Those guys were good. If you didn't tell me that two of those guys were true freshmen, I would have laughed in your face.
Yeah.
Okay, because those guys are 5-star. The number 11 for Z, I think was his last name.
Something like that.
He was the number 1 recruit in the country.
Miles Murphy was the top 10 player.
And that's the same recruiting class as DJ Uiagalelei. So
they did okay in that class.
They did okay in that. Yeah, exactly. So this was a big moment for this offensive line because, like we said in the podcast prior, the last game, in my opinion, where Notre Dame had this kind of, you're the number 1 offensive line, you need to go in there and you're going to run this ball, blah, 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 was the Michigan game.
Yeah.
And they basically didn't show up for whatever reason.
Well, they haven't done that the last few times. They didn't play well against Georgia in 2019. They didn't play well against Georgia in 2017. They didn't play well against Clemson in 2018. They played okay, but they didn't play great. Last night, the offensive line said – right us.
And they they set the tone early because that 65-yard touchdown run was a gaping hole.
I mean, and it wasn't a Clemson mistake. They tried to stunt, which is what they do. Notre Dame caught the stunt. Liam Meichenberg sees it immediately, goes to the second level, doesn't get confused by it, goes to the second level, drives the linebacker off. Aaron Banks gets his eyes inside when he sees the guy slant. He got his eyes inside, expecting a looper because that's what they do, which told me they're prepared for this game.
Yes,
they're mentally prepared. They've practiced that,
and that was one of our complaints last year.
Correct,
Brian.
They just kind of did what they did.
It didn't feel like they were prepared for specifics to the other team.
Correct.
They just did their offense, and
correct.
They weren't ready for specifics, and it appeared like they were ready.
Yeah,
because they. And I know we're talking about the run game, but I want to talk about the pass game.
Well, it's kind of more talking just the offensive line in general.
Yeah, the offensive line, including Kyron Williams. He ran the ball very, very well. I mean, very well. Don't get me wrong, but his blitz pickups were the star of the show for him.
Dude, he got hit harder in pass protection than he did when he was running the ball.
He sacrificed his body on numerous occasions.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The thing is, that's the kind of guy that an offensive line is going to love. We're going to smack people in the face every play. When you got to do it. And I even thought, like, in pass protection, Vince, Clemson's going to get to the quarterback from time to time. And there was a period around the third quarter where I thought the pressures were really getting to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
But they made adjustments that were good were in protection. I thought they made some protection adjustments that then kind of started forcing Clemson to go outside. And that's when Notre Dame Ian Book started stepping into the pocket. But then if they want to, if you want to slant inside and you ride him hard inside and the Ian Book is going to get outside. And instead of doing that spinning thing he used to do in the past, he was calmly stepping out, keeping his eyes downfield.
Yeah.
He was making plays on the run. He wasn't, he would, and then by the fact that he was doing that, then all of a sudden Clemson has to start respecting that. And then then he could kind of take it and run. So it just was a great all-around performance by the line. I thought that, they gave up 2 sacks, but again, you're going to give up sacks to Clemson. But
I was going to say,
but they only had 2, which tied their lowest total of the season. And Notre Dame had over 10 more pass snaps in that game than Syracuse did when the last time Clemson only got 2. I mean, they came into this game with 28 sacks.
Yeah.
And their sacks were there, but there wasn't a whole lot of other plays where, there were plays where Ian Book was affected. But on a lot of those plays, he was affected, but he wasn't hit.
Right.
He wasn't touched, which meant he could slide around. He could throw the ball away. He could take off running. He could hit a check down, wherever the case may be. And those kind of plays where you're getting 4 to 6 on first down are going to be plays that come back to have a big impact. But, you talk about Notre Dame running for over 200 yards. Last time Clemson gave up over 200 yards in a game was the 2016 national title game against Alabama.
Yeah.
A game Clemson won, by the way. Notre Dame had 195 yards in regulation. In the last 2 years, only one team's had more yards in a game in regulation against Clemson than that, and that happened to be this team in Columbus, Ohio, that had this guy named J.K. Dobbins at running back in the semifinal game last year, ran for 196 yards against Clemson. So it was really just a tremendous performance. And this isn't the same Clemson defense. We talked about this, but they're not the same Clemson defense because of their pass defense. Not because of their run defense. Their run defense has been pretty good this year.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame worked them. When they stuck with it, they worked them.
And that's and we already talked about that, but that was the big issue I had, was that they didn't stick with what was working.
Mm-hmm.
They got a little too pass happy. But yeah, you're right. Offensive line played great. Wide receivers. I think the wide receivers stepped up. I mean, we've been talking about the wide receivers as the weak spot on this offense, and all these different things. But I thought, number one, they stepped up in the pass game, but they also blocked their butts off.
And that's one thing they have been doing all year.
They have been. You're right.
Even when they're not making plays in the pass game, they were still blocking well.
Yes, I agree.
Which is why they were on the field. Vince, I wrote an article, I think it was before the Georgia Tech game. I said, look, we've seen everything we need to see from the pass offense this year to be really good. The problem is we haven't seen it all in one game.
Correct.
And, some games see the tight ends make plays, and then other games they don't. One game, Javon McKinley makes play. We see nothing from Avery Davis or Ben Skoranek. One game, Ben Skoranek makes big plays, but then Javon McKinley doesn't do anything.
A bunch of drops, yeah.
Just wasn't – and then the games where I thought the receivers were playing well, Ian Book just wasn't willing to attack, right?
Yep.
Last night it was like kind of all on the same page.
Yeah.
Javon McKinley played like a top 100 recruit, which is, what he was.
What he was, yeah.
And Ben Skoranek played good complementary football, although he was the one guy on offense that I thought had some big mistakes of the veterans.
That drop at the end of the game was huge.
And when they had the ball first down after Jeremiah Wusu's forced fumble, he gets that illegal block that sends him back 15 yards.
It was close, but why?
Right.
Why?
Right. And so, but then he also made some plays. It wasn't like he only played bad. You got it. Look, was the ball a little high? Yeah, but you got to make that catch. It's 4th and 7.
2 weeks ago, twice.
Right. So again, I'm not going to crush him for it because we've seen him make that play. He didn't make it last night, But then Avery Davis doesn't get targeted much until the last couple drives, and then he makes big time plays. And that post route, that's okay. So you guys want to know why I focus so much on route running? Because that's the difference between that corner is playing. So understand this. The safety, I think it was the safety, it might have been a nickel. He's playing with his butt to the sideline, which means he's going to let you take the post. And if you take the post or the seam, he's just going to squeeze on you. And maybe you complete it, and it's a 30-yard gain. Most likely he breaks it up, right? So that's why the route manipulation that I always talk about is so important that we just don't see a lot. So it's post corner. That was a corner post. He knew I had to. So when you've heard me, if anyone's heard me seen me write, or heard me talk about, you have to attack the leverage of the defender. And the reason that is important is because the leverage of the defender is going to tell you what he's guarding against. If he's playing you inside, it's because he doesn't want you to go inside. And the way that he was playing Avery Davis is like, I'm not letting you beat me on an out cut or a corner route, which is what Notre Dame runs a lot of from the slot, things like that. And I'm gonna play the post, right? So by stemming him as hard as he did outside, that forced a corner to say, okay, I got to now open and cover you outside. And then he stuck him back to the post. And that is route precision 101. And that's the difference between an incomplete pass or a 25-yard gain and a 53-yard gain that completely changes the makeup of that football game. And then a couple plays later, he's covered initially, works back inside, shows some savviness, and then Ian Book hits him. That's another play that I don't know if Ian Book makes all the time.
Right.
And last night, again, game on the line, that wasn't an easy ball to hit. That was a contested throw.
I think Ian runs that ball more often than not.
And doesn't score.
Correct.
Yes, and doesn't score.
Right.
And
no,
so,
I agree.
Yeah. And I thought the clock management at the end of the game was a whole lot better than the clock management at the end of the first half, which was, again, another example of I don't think Notre Dame played a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination. When they ran the clock down and they had a chance maybe to get a field goal out of it, and they just let the clock run, and then Ian Brooks takes off running instead of throwing the ball away. And that was just terrible clock management. But it just kind of gets back to the fact that Notre Dame left a lot of points in the field. That was another an opportunity for 3 points. So instead of attempting a 59 or whatever it was yard field goal, maybe you 57. Can get another 10 yards, and now you're in Jonathan Doerr's zone.
It's going to be a school record if you hit it.
Right. So, those are things where you had those missed opportunities that as a coaching staff, you can clean that stuff up. And then, of course, they didn't make that same mistake, and they didn't rush on. Here's the key. One of the hardest things to do in a 2-minute drive is finding the balance between going fast and rushing.
Sure.
And when you rush, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to see pre-snap. I didn't see the safety, so I threw this route, and I didn't see the safety backside, and he picked it off. She always wondered too much, like, how did he throw it right to the safety? Well, because I was in a rush. I didn't get. I made my call side read, but I didn't make my backside read effectively enough. And that's how mistakes happen. Well, last night they were poised, but there was a sense of urgency to it.
Yeah, for sure.
But it was also not rushed. They said, we have time. Let's make sure we're executing. And it was really just an excellent drive. But, it doesn't work if guys don't step up. And here's something I really liked about last night. And it applies to the defense too, but mainly the offenses. Ian Book made a huge, huge mistake in this game that could have cost Notre Dame the game. Michael Mayer made 2 huge mistakes in the first half that could have cost Notre Dame the game. And in both instances, when given the opportunity to make up for those mistakes, they both did. And I think that's another example of the makeup of a team with heart.
And Ian Book kept going back to Mayer.
Correct.
Correct. As a fifth-year senior.
So did Tommy Rees.
Well, good point. Good point. Yeah. But a fifth-year senior and a true freshman, you're like, okay, kid, moment's too big for you. I'm going to somebody else.
And look, and I've hammered Brian Kelly about not playing freshmen at certain spots. And I'm not changing that because I would say, hey, you know what? Maybe if you had Jordan Johnson ready to go or Xavier Watts, maybe you could have made a couple more plays last night. But so it's not like, because they won and all these other things don't mean anything anymore.
No, they still need something, yeah.
But I'll say this.
He didn't take them out.
Brian Kelly's always had a shorter leash with younger players than he does veteran players.
Absolutely. That's why Kyron Williams got one snap last year.
Well,
I know, but
I would not – would you have been shocked at all if after those 2 mistakes, if Brian Kelly would have said, play Brock Wright more?
Shocked?
I can't deal with Mayer making these mistakes.
Shocked? No. Ticked off? Absolutely.
But would you have been surprised if he made that mistake?
Not
because of why? Because of his past. But you know what Brian Kelly did last night? Stay the course.
Yeah.
And that's what you need from a head coach on game day. Stay the course. And I thought Brian Kelly handled it masterfully.
Yeah.
I really did. And I think it allowed for a win. And that's why that team plays so confidently. So what did I report a couple weeks ago? And it's what came out after the Pitt game was Brian Kelly told him, hey, guys, stop worrying about making mistakes. Just go out and play.
And when you can do that, you play so loose, you play so much
because
faster.
Notre Dame made huge mistakes in the first half of last week's game. Ian Book made a huge mistake in the third quarter fumbling that football. Huge mistakes that a lot of times get you beat by the number 1 team.
No doubt. And it was late in the game.
They don't want to test their luck and do it again in December 19th.
No.
But the point is you made those mistakes, and instead of just crushing them, it just stay the course. Stay the course. And the result was Notre Dame going out and Jeremiah Wusu had the same situation. The series before his forced fumble that he returned for a touchdown, he made 2 horrible plays. One was on a play where he went to make a tackle, and it would have been like a 3-yard gain on a quick slide route.
Totally.
And he misses the guy, and then 3 more people miss. The next thing was a 20-something yard gain. Then he missed another tackle later, and I think Clemson got a field goal out of that drive.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And then the next drive, he's like, okay, I'm ticked now, and I'm going to – and so the next 2 series, he goes out and makes 2 game-changing plays. One was the fumble he returned for a touchdown, and then the next series, he gets beat on a slant route on 3rd down, and he closes behind the guy and strips it. I mean, perfect strip, too. I mean, it's just textbook.
It's a good transition because we're going to start talking defense.
Yeah. So but just to see this team make the mistakes and guys got beat. Corners got beat.
They did.
And the only guy that really got punished for it was Tariq Bracy. But honestly, I'm okay with that. Sometimes if a guy's not playing well, you got somebody else play him.
And they ended up doing that because Clarence Lewis came in.
Right. Because Tariq's mistakes were continuing, and so he's kind of been in and out of the lineup. So again, it wasn't like they just every time a guy makes a mistake, don't worry, pat him on the head. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
I'm sure Michael Mayer got told, you better get your head on straight, buddy. But you say that, but then you go back to him.
Right.
And we've seen him do that a couple other times this year. Kyron Williams fumbling the ball against Florida State,
and they give it right back to him.
Yeah. Last week against Georgia Tech, same kind of thing. So I think that creates a sense of, hey, coach has got my back that I don't know if we've always seen at Notre Dame.
No, completely agree.
And that was a big part of it. So, I mean, offensively, I think there's still another level they can get to. There's another level they need to get to, honestly. Because, there's another team that they're playing in 3 weeks that has the kind of offense that could say you better bring your A game offensively, because I don't care how well the defense plays. If that team's on, that's North Carolina. Well, if that team's on, you better bring it. So, and then this, upcoming Saturday against Boston College, I think matchup wise, I think BC is going to have a tougher time with it than North Carolina, because just matchup wise, I don't think they have the run game. They don't have the offensive line.
But North Carolina's offense, number one, you're on the road again,
right? On a Friday.
It's a day after
Thanksgiving.
I mean, there's just a lot of, we'd always talk about the intangibles, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of the intangibles, in my opinion, go against Notre Dame,
right?
Because they're on the road and all that different things. So, we'll talk about that one when it gets a little bit closer. But yeah, you're right. It's they're not a complete team,
right,
by any stretch of the imagination. They meaning North Carolina, but Notre Dame needs to. They can't just sleepwalk through that one.
Yeah, Notre Dame. But my point was Notre Dame's not there yet either.
Correct.
I agree. That's the thing, is like, this wasn't that arrived moment for Notre Dame last night, and this was meant to be a compliment. This is meant to be an encouraging thing.
Sure.
This was not
another level.
We can't play any better than that. I mean, okay, perfect example. You mentioned earlier the USC game in 2005. Notre Dame could not have played better that game.
No.
USC was just better. I mean, they just had better dudes, right? And so at the end of the day, no matter how hard Notre Dame battled, no matter how well they played, at the end of the day, USC was just a better team.
Sure.
I felt like Saturday was the reverse of that, where Clemson was Notre Dame and Notre Dame was USC, where Clemson could not – I mean, imagine if the quarterback would have thrown another pick, or if Notre Dame's pass rush had been a little bit better, then it's a blowout the other way.
They're able to score touchdowns instead of field goals.
Right. So, to me, it was like Notre Dame's miscues allowed Clemson to get back in the game, and then like champions do – Clemson, you're going to give us a chance to get back in it. We're going to take advantage.
Sure.
And that's what was nice to see about last night's game, Vince, because the point is there's hopefully, and I think they will, Clark Lee and his staff and the offensive coaches and their staff, it's that, hey, guys, I loved your heart, loved how you played. I love the poise. But you know what? We've got some stuff we got to clean up.
Well, and they know it too, because and that's the best part about winning the game where you make some mistakes, is it's so much easier to clean those up. It's so much easier because you'd be like, look, guys, we just played the number one team in the country, but it was not a perfect game. You know that there was mistakes. Let's go clean those up and take our play to a whole other level.
And no matter how much you may say we want to win a national title, at the end of the day, Vince, you need to see yourself able to win some of those games. And so now you say, okay, how do they handle this? But anyway, let's get to the defense first, because that was that was, to me, the most fun part of this game to watch, was because it was that was the good on good battle, and it was a lot of fun to watch.
It was a lot of fun to watch, and I if you just look at the box score and you look at the passing numbers, for example, by DJ, that's the most passing yards against Notre Dame of all time. And all the history of Notre Dame, no quarterback has thrown for that many yards. So you look at that, you're like, defense didn't have a very good day. That's not really the case. Yep. You clearly didn't watch the game. So let's start at the front. Let's start with the pass rush. And there's two parts of the front, right? There's pass rush, and then there's run defense. Run defense was, they shut down the best running back in the country. Shut him down.
Fewest yards rushing for Clemson since 2011. Think about that.
And that was before they were good.
Right, correct. Travis Etienne's fewest games as a starter. And think about this. He had 28 yards on 18 carries. What does first carry go for?
Like 10, I think.
10.
Yeah.
That means his next 17 carries, he gained 18 yards.
Yeah.
That's – and look, he caught 8 passes for 57 yards. So 26 touches. Travis Etienne didn't even get to 90 yards. That was such an important piece of it. Because, again, it was going to be one of those things where Notre Dame said, if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to beat us with a freshman quarterback. And as good as that kid played on Saturday, it wasn't good enough to beat him.
Correct.
When the game was on the line twice the game was on the line, that was their ability to run the clock out in the fourth quarter, which they couldn't do because Notre Dame dominated them up front in the run game and forced him to pass, and he couldn't make it. And then the second overtime. And to me, when you look at the run defense, it's been this way all year long. I mean, outside of the Florida State game, which, again, that was the bad performance where they gave up 150 yards.
Right.
Which is like 15 yards less than what Brian Van Gorder gave up over the course of 3 years on average. That's their bad game. It's been brilliant. It truly has been brilliant. And they've done it against really – I mean, think about this. This stretch of football that they're on as a rush defense, which is now was it up to 13 games, 12 against non-option teams. They've played A.J. Dillon, Javion Hawkins, the kid from Iowa State whose name escapes me at Breezy Hall, and Travis Etienne. That's some dudes.
No, absolutely.
And they're holding teams to under 100 yards.
And the kid from the kid from Pitt? No, Georgia Tech. The kid from Georgia Tech.
Jahmyr Gibbs. Correct.
He's going to be.
He's a really good player.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really been impressive. And again, when you can – what has always been true? If you can run the ball and stop the run, you got a chance to be really good.
Absolutely.
Notre Dame can run the ball and they can
stop the run.
And I think it's especially true for some programs. I think Alabama can recruit the level of skill players that allows them to build a championship team on a predominantly throwing football team.
Yeah.
I think at Notre Dame with their just where they are and the recruits that they can draw from, they can get big-time receivers, but I don't think they can get Will Fuller, Michael Floyd, and Chase Claypool on the same roster.
Right.
Which is what Alabama can do.
Sure.
So you have to have that element of you're always going to recruit great linemen. You're always going to recruit great tight ends. You can recruit good backs. You're going to be able to recruit good quarterbacks. You got to develop them. That's a different conversation. But, so you got to be a team that can win in the trenches, and that's on both sides of the ball. And we've seen that from the front, and we saw it again last night. I thought Kurt Hinish played a great game. I thought the two veteran ends as run defenders were brilliant the entire game. I mean, their ability to set the edge, their ability to just be physical and just throw – I mean, it was either they were forcing Etienne to cut way too soon or they were forcing him to bounce.
Mm-hmm.
And either one is a win. When your linebackers are as athletic as Notre Dame's linebackers are,
bouncing is
as soon as
good.
you bounce, ball game.
Done. It's over. It's over.
Oh, and then if you can somehow get outside the linebackers, there's this kid named Kyle Hamilton.
He's going to clean everything up.
Take 20 yards and 4 steps.
Some of the plays that he made, and they highlighted it on the TV copy,
mm-hmm.
but filling a hole in the run game at the line of scrimmage from the safety position, the speed
he can come from such depth that, to your point, Vince, for Clemson safeties to do that, they got to line him up at 7 yards.
Correct.
Notre Dame can line Kyle Hamilton up at 12, 13, 14 yards, and he can still fill. And we saw that with Jeremiah Wusu on some blitzes. He can blitz from further back than most people can blitz from because he's so explosive. And so, and then here's the other thing too, Vince. I have said at times Notre Dame has the best 10-man defense in the country. Right?
It's
the Buck linebacker's been a problem.
Mea culpa time.
No, not some mea culpa time. He has played terrible.
No. I mean,
what he did against Clemson doesn't mean he all of a sudden played better than we thought he played in the previous games.
I'm not saying that.
What we said was, I don't know what they're seeing in practice from him that's making them play him. Saturday,
it was that
we saw it, and I talked to somebody tonight, and they said that the coaches kind of threw down the gauntlet with Shane and said, "Hey, we keep throwing you out there. We believe in you, but you're making us look stupid. You got to step up. We're going to find somebody else to do it." And Shane said, "Okay, you want to see what I can do? I'll show you." And we saw it from the beginning. I mean, first drive of the game, 3rd and 1, he flows, he sees the open hole and just explodes downhill, hits Travis Etienne in the backfield, blows it up. Saw it a blitz. It was one of the. He's not instinctive. He doesn't play instinctive. And the blitz where I think a couple series later, he blitzes and the QB tries to throw behind him and he jumps up, bats it down, right? Bats down a pass intended for Amari Rodgers, who had a great game yesterday. Bats down a 3rd down throw for him. His he was instinctive. He was beating guys to the point of attack. And that's what you expect to see from Shane Simon.
Yes.
The best linebacker, a buck they've had since this kid named Jalen Smith. Just pure athleticism. I'm not saying he's a better player than Drew Tranquill. I'm not saying that. I'm saying he's a better athlete.
All right.
And that's saying something because Drew Tranquill's a pretty good athlete.
No doubt.
So
on an NFL roster.
But he just wasn't a good football player. Last night, he played, or Saturday night, he played like a good football player.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, because if you've been as good as you have been so far this season with terrible Buck linebacker production,
right?
If he can build on this,
oh man,
now you're seeing something because and it wasn't just blitz. I thought what they were going to do. Honestly, I thought they were just going to blitz him the whole game.
Because that's when he was good.
That's right.
In the first 5 games is when he didn't have to think about it.
And he did blitz.
But
the plays he made that I was most impressed with were plays where he had to read.
Correct.
He had to step, read, and attack.
He had a nose for the football last night that he has not had all season because, there's only so much that you can see when you're watching it live. And we've gone back and I was taking a look at it, and he was around the football more than we've seen all year long. And it was fun to watch. Good to see. Yeah. It was so good to see because that is in that game. And of course we hope it's that way moving forward. But as a play caller on the defensive side, that allows you to do so much more because they were having to kind of overplay that side with Kyle Hamilton.
Right.
Now you don't necessarily have to do that. Right. Can you imagine? I mean, bringing Kyle Hamilton and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah on the same side, there's so many things you can do if the Buck position, if Shane Simon is playing the way he played in this game.
And if you can get that, here's the other thing it helps because we talked about the pass rush. Here's what I'll say about Notre Dame's pass rush. It's proven to be very clutch. When they needed to step up and make a play, they've done it. Saw it against Georgia Tech last week. We saw it on Saturday. But there was also a lot of snaps on Saturday where the pass rush just didn't get home on both of the 50-yard plays. Because here's the big fear that was like with Clemson is I'm afraid they're going to make the big plays to keep them in the game, and they did that on Saturday. I mean, they had a 50-some-yard touchdown early on. They had another 50-yard throw that set up a touchdown. I think I had them down for like 8 plays of over 22 yards.
It's too many.
They scored. They got points on every drive that they had a pass of over 20 yards. They also had 2 completions on 3rd and longs that moved the chains. So they gave up too much, and at times it was the pass rush just gave and when you have a quarterback that talented and receivers as talented as Clemson's receivers, when you give them that much time, they're going to make plays.
Right.
And I thought there were some mistakes by the Notre Dame secondary, but at times it's just like you can't guard that guy forever. And look, that's what we saw.
Clemson may not have household names, at every position.
There's no Justin Ross or T. Higgins, right?
No, there's not. But there's talent there.
They're good.
They're
very
good
players.
Okay,
they're a lot like Notre Dame. Notre Dame doesn't have a Chase Claypool, but Javon McKinley can play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is he going to be a first-round pick? No. That kid's a good college football player. And that's how Clemson is. Like Cornell Powell's not all of a sudden Justin Ross or T. Higgins.
He's a 5th-year senior.
Good football player.
I'm pretty sure. He's been
Amar Rogers is a pretty good football player.
Yeah.
And that's the point, Vince, is if you can't get pressure on the quarterback, it's going to hurt you. Now, here's why I say Shane Simon stepping up. If he can build on that and continue, because that's the question for Ian Book. It's a question for Javon McKinley. It's a question for Shane Simon, Avery Davis. It's a lot of these guys. It's okay. Can you build on this? Can you do this now moving forward consistently? Because that's how we're going to compete for a championship when you're looking at it from the coach's standpoint. So can he build on this? Can he do this again next week against Boston College? Can he do it against North Carolina? Because if he can, then now you have a weapon now that you didn't have your first 6 games. And that allows you to maybe dial up some more pass blitzes, knowing that Shane Simon can protect himself a buck, and you now dial up some more pressures with Owusu-Koramoah or Drew White or Kyle Hamilton to help protect you from the fact that you're not getting the kind of pass rush you need from your front 4.
Yep.
And so that's why that matters. And so, but overall, outside of, just not consistently getting pass rush, Notre Dame was clearly superior to Clemson in the trenches. And that's not going to change when they play on December 19th.
No, you're right. That's not going to change. Yeah. I thought Kurt Hinish had we talked about the fact that the interior of the Clemson offensive line could be a place where Notre Dame could take some advantage. And I think they absolutely did that. I thought 95-41 for Notre Dame just got tremendous push up the front, up the middle, and just disrupted the run game all night long.
If you go back and watch the game, what you'll see is a big reason why Clemson couldn't run the ball. So there's this thing that you say as a coach, Vince, you know this. you need to reset the line of scrimmage, and both sides of the ball are trying to do that.
Absolutely.
The offensive line is trying to reset it in their favor. So basically,
and Notre Dame's offensive line did that all night long.
And here's what that means, right? So if the offensive line comes off the ball and pushes the defensive line 2 yards down the field, and the running back gets hit at the where the line is, then he gained 2 yards.
Correct.
And a lot of times the reason he'll gain more is because now he can stay on his track. Right, so if his aiming point's the inside hip of the tight end, he can stay on that, and now he can stay it even further, which then forces the defense to commit, which means he can now bounce later or make his cut later. When you stalemate or you get knocked back, not only does when you hit the line, you're now back, but also now you have to make your decision a lot faster, which means once a running back bounces or cuts, the defense now knows that's where he's going, rally to the ball.
Right.
And so that's why it's so important to get that push to reset the line of scrimmage. And if you watch the game, you're going to see that the entire game was played at or behind the line of scrimmage, almost the entire game. That is dominance. And no, the defensive tackles didn't make a lot of plays themselves because
they don't. They're not Jerry Tillery.
Right. But they are why so many other guys made plays.
Correct. And
that's what was – I mean, it was just an outstanding performance. And, again, there's some things the defense has to clean up. Tackling was not good in the game Saturday.
Open field
Some of it was Clemson's got good athletes. Some of it was just Jeremiah Wusu, I think twice he was going for a knockout instead of wrapping up. Angles weren't good. I thought the safety play at times on the deep coverage was not good. I thought Kyle Hamilton had a really bad angle playing middle of the field on one of the throws down near the end zone. So there were some mistakes that were made. But, again, when they needed to make a play, they stepped up and made a play. Yeah. I mean, like a play that may not go noticed after the 2 sacks. Clemson's in a 3rd and 24. They hit the tight end up the seam. Sean Crawford doesn't worry about trying to pick it off. Which, again, what was this mistake he made against Pitt 2 weeks ago? The ball was in the air, and he tried to time it, but against Clemson, he just and drilled the guy and knocks it out. Now, listen, if you go back and look at that, that had been about a 13, 14-yard gain. So now it's 4th and 10 or 11 as opposed to 4th and 24.
Difference.
Now, does that mean it would have been easy for him? No. But 4th and 11, let's just say this. Your playbook on 4th and 24 is a lot shorter and smaller than your playbook on 4th and 10.
No doubt about it. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then also on 4th and 24, the odds of you doing something that's going to draw a penalty are a lot less too. Whereas a 4th and 10, you can hit a quicker throw that maybe they're trying to close on. And
sure.
Whereas on 4th and 24, you want to complete a pass of 10 yards, have at it. Right.
And that's what they did. I mean, they did about 10 yards. Yeah,
exactly. So they're just plays like that, Vince. It was just one of the things that I talked about in my keys to the game. And I think you and I talked about this in the podcast last week is to win a game like this, your dudes have to be dudes.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, that's what happened at Notre Dame. Clemson's dudes were dudes also.
They were.
But I will say this, Notre Dame on Saturday night had more dudes. And 2 years ago when this game was played out, and this is what we talked about before the game, as good as the Notre Dame defense was in 2018, their dudes were all up front. I mean, Tranquil, Coney, good football players. Jalen Elliott, Alohi Gilman, good football players. Troy Pride, Julian Love, good football players. And as much as I love those kids and they're good players, they were all 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th-round draft picks, right? Notre Dame in this game had first-round draft picks at linebacker and safety, and to me that's the difference. And on offense, so in a big game like this, your dudes have to be better than their dudes. And I think on both sides of the ball, at the end of the day, Vince, Notre Dame's dudes were better than Clemson's dudes, and that's something as a Notre Dame fan that has to have you pretty excited,
Well, we haven't been able to say that in a long time.
Yeah. And we didn't really know if that was going to be true because it's kind of hard to – when you're playing Duke and South Florida and Florida State who stinks, and, I mean, they got spanked by Pitt this weekend. Pitt's not any good. They didn't have their starting quarterback. Georgia Tech's young and talented, but they're young and talented in a couple spots. They just haven't played anybody good, so it's kind of like, how good are they really?
Yeah.
Well, we found out Saturday night.
Right.
They're really good. And as we said, was Clemson the number 1 team in the country without Trevor Lawrence? No. But they were 3rd or 4th.
They're still really good. And look,
I mean?
no, it was a big deal that Notre Dame beat the number 1 team in the country, right? It's a big deal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what's their record against top 10 teams? Like the last 10 times they've played them, I think it's 0-10.
Yeah.
So Clemson without Trevor Lawrence still fits in that category. So this is still a program win for
without
Notre Dame.
Trevor Lawrence, still the best team that Notre Dame's beat under Brian Kelly. The only team that I would say maybe comes close, and I don't even think it's then, is maybe the 2012 Stanford team. But that 2012 Stanford team didn't really start getting hot till later in the year.
Sure.
Which is why they weren't in the top 10 when they played that year.
Yeah, right.
So again, Notre Dame has battled with some really good teams. Clemson 2015, Florida State 2014, Georgia 2017. The difference in this game is in those games, Notre Dame played their butts off and just wasn't quite good enough. In this game, it was the other team that played their butt off but just wasn't quite good enough.
Yep.
Now, will that be different in December 19th? Yeah. The question is,
no doubt.
Will Notre Dame make the improvements that they're capable of? Because I say, well, Clemson will be different on December 19th. Well, we're going to find out the next month if Notre Dame will be too. Do they use this as a springboard to get to the next level? And then to me, that's the ultimate takeaway. And the final piece is, in a game like this, you can't have big mistakes in special teams. And outside of kicking out of bounds a couple times, special teams played great. And Jack Lamb on kick coverage was an absolute monster.
That was the kick coverage teams were unbelievable in this game. I mean, you when you talk about special teams, you hope that it's a draw, right? I mean, and if you can get a big play from your special teams, great. But you're hoping for a draw, and I really do think that's how Notre Dame's coaches look at it. That's why Matt Salerno's catching punts. I mean, you're hoping for a draw, and I thought the coverage teams were outstanding because they didn't get a chance to return any kicks. They were all touchbacks.
Right.
But the coverage teams were outstanding. They were in tough field position the entire game, and that makes a difference.
It does. Against this defense, it absolutely does. And that's what I say. If Notre Dame can limit the big plays the next time they play, it's going to be a different outcome. Yeah. And that's what great teams do, right? Vince, you play well in all three phases of the game, and I think for the most part, Notre Dame was far from perfect, but they played well in all three phases of the game, and they never backed down. And at the end of the day, they made more plays. And that's why right now, as we go into this next week of the season, Notre Dame is 7-0 and the number 2 team in the country. The highest they've been ranked since the end. The last time Notre Dame was ranked in the top 2 was actually the final week of the regular season in 2012. Because remember, they didn't get the number 1 ranking until going into the USC game at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So this is and they got up to number 3 in 2018. They got up to number 3 in 2017. They've never got up to number 2. And now you say you got through that, you slayed that dragon. So now you just got to handle your business these next 4 games, and then you get your rematch.
And that's easier said than done. This November slate that's left is I don't want to say it's a gauntlet, but it's harder competition than you face in the first 6 games.
It's challenging but manageable.
Correct.
Is how I'd say it. Notre Dame's better than the next 4 teams they're going to play.
No doubt.
They're all going to be challenging. And that's the thing we'll talk about during the week is how do they handle success? So Notre Dame has proven that they can play as the underdog. Sure. But but here's the thing. Now that you beat Clemson, now you're the hunted. And that's going to include December 19th. You're the hunted now.
They are the hunted. And I will say that I think this team can handle it. I'll say that. I think this team can handle it. I really do. So
based on what they did last night, I agree with you.
Absolutely.
We'll find out on Saturday and when they go play Boston College. But I mean,
no doubt.
Yeah, it was a fun game, Vince. It was a great game between 2 teams.
Yes,
and,
it was.
I was impressed with how Brian Kelly had this team prepared and how they handled business. And it was, as a fan of college football, it was a great, great experience to see the crowd rush the field. It was pretty awesome.
It was.
And I'll just leave it at that. And, look, this is the game we've been waiting on, man. We said Notre Dame's going to get another chance. What are you going to do with it? And they absolutely took advantage. They got that big win, and
it felt good, man. It just felt really good. And NBC reported on Sunday that it was the top ranked Notre Dame game on NBC in the last 15 years
since the USC Notre Dame game back in 2005,
right?
And by a lot. I mean, by a lot too. I mean, some of the numbers I saw on that were like, "Ooh, boy."
And that includes, Georgia when they came to town in 17. And that includes some big games. So that's saying something. I mean, this was a big game. This was the biggest game in college football up to this point. There's no question in my mind. And the best part is we get to see it again, in theory, as long as everybody takes care of their business.
Actually, you missed the best part, Vince. Do you mind me correcting you before we wrap up?
No, that's fine.
The best part is that Notre Dame beat the number 1 team in the country on the same day that Indiana spanked Michigan.
That was great. We were doing the game day show on WSBT that you are not kind enough to join us on, and I had that game on off camera, and I'm watching it, and we talked to old Notre Dame players, and we were talking to Robbie Toma and Carlo Calabrese and Chris Zorich, and I was like, hey guys, I've got the game on over here. I said it's a great day any day that Michigan's getting spanked, and they
spanked
to a man. They're like, absolutely, this is great.
Spanked. They didn't just lose to Indiana. They got smacked by Indiana.
It was fantastic.
And then you thought, hey, maybe Michigan State's not as bad as they looked against Rutgers. Yeah, they are.
No,
they just got destroyed by Iowa. 0-2 Iowa, I believe, right?
Yeah, they're that bad.
They're 49-7, I think is what it was.
Bad. It was
bad. And Michigan got curb stomped by Indiana.
It was great. It was a good day. I mean, it
was a great day.
It's a great day for college.
It was a great football day, no question about it.
Yes, no doubt.
It was a fun day. So so Notre Dame beat the number 1 team in the country. Michigan got smashed by Indiana.
That's right.
It's a good day to be a Hoosier, buddy. That's all I'm going to say. It's a good day to live in the Hoosier state.
You got that right.
Absolutely say that.
So make sure you guys stay locked into IrishBreakdown.com. Make sure you, if you're listening to the podcast, that's awesome. Get your friends to subscribe. If you're watching us on the YouTube channel, thanks for finding us. Make sure if you don't know about our YouTube channel, get in there.
Smash the subscribe button, buddy.
Hit that subscribe button. We're throwing all kinds of material out on the YouTube channel from here on out. So, and then, of course, all the analysis and the breakdowns on IrishBreakdown.com. So everything's coming your way. Boston College is coming up, so we'll have all of that preview. I'll have a preview on Wednesday.
Is there any kind of interesting storyline with this Boston College game?
I didn't.
We may talk about it during the week. We'll talk about it during the week.
Yeah, there's a little storyline out there that they've got a pretty decent quarterback.
And that's not even the biggest storyline. I'm gonna have an article out this week, Vince, where this week is the opportunity for redemption.
Okay.
When was the last time Notre Dame beat a number 1 team?
1993.
What happened a week later?
Yeah, well, they lost to Boston College. So
this isn't redemption for Brian Kelly, no. There's not a player on the team that was alive.
It's for
this is redemption for Notre Dame Nation. This is redemption for Notre Dame Nation.
Absolutely.
And it's going to tell us a lot about this football team.
No doubt.
So make sure you stay. All the BC content this week will be out. And, of course, you will have an opponent insider with AJ Black this week, who runs the BC site for Sports Illustrated, does a great job. So we'll have him. And then, of course, you and I will be back on Thursday.
Yep.
To preview Notre Dame and Boston College. But
we'll have some matchup videos and all kinds of fun stuff too.
I'm gonna enjoy this one for just a few more hours before I dive into the BC film. I'm gonna enjoy this victory over Clemson just a little bit longer.
Yep. So make sure you guys stay locked in, and we'll talk to you next time. Go Irish.